Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this session of our Autumn Learning Programme. I'm Fionnuala Lennon. I'm Head of New Settlements and Garden Communities in Homes England. Really delighted to welcome you to our Autumn Learning Programme this morning, which is focused around what it takes to bring forward a new settlement type opportunity. Our Autumn Learning Programme is a series of knowledge sharing sessions on topics that you've told us are of interest to you. And today's event is around planning and delivering at scale, garden communities and new settlements. Next slide, please. The Autumn Learning Programme is brought to you by Homes England's Local Government Capacity Centre. And this slide summarises who the Local Government Capacity Centre are. Next slide, please. The Learning Programme is just one of the tools offered by the Local Government Capacity Centre. Our offers also include the Housing Information Hub and Regeneration and a Capacity Analysis tool, which you can use to assess capacity. And we look forward to hearing how we did in the survey poll at the end of the session. Next slide, please. On the screen, you'll see a breakdown of today's session and the running order. It's going to be a very informative session and very delighted to have three really excellent speakers today who not only have the expertise on their subject matter, but also have the lived experience of trying to achieve and deliver a new settlement. So initially we're going to hear from Neil Cole from Cumberland Council, and followed by Naisha Pullane from Harlow Gilston Garden Town, and finally Jeremy Potter from Chelmsford City Council. After that, we'll follow up with a question and answer session with the three speakers using the questions that you've populated in the chat. Next slide, please. So some received wisdom about the planning and delivery of new settlement scaled opportunities is that they're quite linear and reasonably similar to delivering a housing estate, for example. In a way, it is as if a new settlement project moves from step to step, like following instructions on a Lego set. We know that that's not the reality. It's very different. The challenges, the opportunities, the need for parallel working streams, multiple stakeholders, changes in government policy, lots and lots of factors there that essentially mean that it's a very complex web of activity that needs to be directed, managed and executed if a new garden community or a new settlement scale project is to be successful. The three garden community projects that we're going to highlight today, St Cuthbert's in Carlisle, Harlow Gilston Garden Town and Chelmsford Garden Community, illustrate the journey that many of these scale projects need to take, from navigating planning policy through to securing planning consent and getting ready for development, through to delivery itself and beyond. It is quite an amazing journey, and I think that you'll come away today with a real understanding of the challenges, the opportunities, and what it is possible to achieve if you stick with that journey. So I'm now going to hand over to our first speaker today, and that is Neil Cole. Over to you, Neil.
Yeah, morning everyone. So just in terms of St Cuthbert's Garden Village, well, our adopted local plan back in 2016 identified a broad location for growth to the south of Carlisle and committed us to preparing a site-specific local plan as a means of reversing that hemorrhaging of working age families. So spread across three of the existing garden villages to the south of Carlisle, St Cuthbert's will over the next 30 years deliver some 10,000 homes, employment space and a large range of support and infrastructure. We were fortunate to join the Garden Settlements Programme in 2017, and it's the largest single development opportunity in the north of England. And that in itself has created sort of some of the immediate challenges for us, not least of which it's obviously meant to be a step up in design terms, And politically, our members were very clear that they wanted St Cuthbert's to be an exemplar of sustainable development. So could I have the next slide, please? So first things first, how do you get everyone on side when you're talking about planning for a large scale development? Now, more often than not, whenever you put a red line on a local plan and go out to consultation, that immediately, you might as well sit back and have lit the fuse, because invariably that leads to a lot of community anger, a lot of community distrust, and feelings of though it's a fait accompli. We did it very differently with St Cuthbert's, and our first task was to prepare a master plan over 2 stages. And right at the outset in 2017, we went into full-blown listening mode. We worked really hard with local communities, landowners and key stakeholders to really bring them on the journey right from day one. We deliberately held off from defining the area or even the scale of development, and really focused on getting the vision and the objectives for St Cuthbert's right in the first place. And we had to work really hard to balance expectations on all sides, certainly with landowners, because all they saw were pound signs in front of them. And obviously with members of the community, they wanted to see, how St Cuthbert's could really help them moving forward, because in many ways the villages upon which that St Cuthbert's is coming forward is really devoid of any kind of sort of infrastructure, not even buses, play spaces or anything of that nature. So as I say, through a lot of that early engagement work, we worked really hard. I think it is fair to say that we don't have 100% sign up to it, but I think it is fair to say that there certainly has been no marches on the Civic Centre, and we're not dealing with thousands of objections against the plan itself. A key feature of St Cuthbert's has been that continuity of political support, and we've gone from being a Conservative authority when we were Carlisle, we've gone through local government reorganisation, we're now Cumberland, and we've gone to a very, very deep red. That said, all the way through, that political support has been there through one administration to the next. And a key feature of that has been we've had a cross-party member advisory group that's sat on and worked with St Cuthbert's literally from day one. And notwithstanding the small challenge of nutrient neutrality, we've also worked really hard with landowners and developers to get a push on with regards to securing some early applications and trying to get some of those over the line. Can I have the next slide, please? So how can we be really clear on what our design expectations are, given that it is a garden village? Well, we were fortunate in 2022 to get on the National Design Code Pathfinder programme. But very quickly, we realised we couldn't code for everything, given the time and the budget that we had available to us. So instead, what we decided to do was to focus on key locations and focus on 5 key themes, which very much reflected the vision and the objectives that we had. We were very conscious that we didn't want the code just to be another rerun of the master plan exercise or the previous consultations that we'd done for the local plan. We were very acutely aware we didn't want to sort of just to literally do a rerun of that, lead to consultation fatigue. We were also very mindful at the time that the MPPF was totally silent on design coding, and with my manager's hat on, I was really unclear of what the status of the code was. I'd heard a lot of experts talk about a code being a simple pass or fail test, that it's got to contain the must-haves, the should-haves, so there was already that clear split between what is policy, what is a local plan. And if you remember back in the day, we also had the Levelling Up Bill that was working its way through. It was telling us that we could either prepare a local plan or a supplementary plan. The SPDs were basically going to be phased out. So we had to take an early decision on what this code wanted to be. And we were really clear that we wanted it to have both longevity but also bite. So we made the early decision that the code itself would be embedded into a range of the local plan policies, which I'll talk about in a few slides' time. So I can have that next slide, please. So as I touched on, viability and deliverability of infrastructure is probably one of our biggest challenges. I think in the first instance, we were fortunate to get the Carlisle Southern Link Road funded through HIF. But it is fair to say that we still had 1 or 2 hairy moments. Post-Brexit, we were in a situation where we had cargo ships docked outside of the ports and were unable to get in. We also had the small matter of Russia invading Ukraine, and we had costs that were absolutely spiraling. And all of this was literally happening at a time when we were literally on the verge of awarding that construction contract. But we held firm. The link road is now on site and it's due for completion later next year. Also, when we looked at the infrastructure bill, when we first did the master planning exercise, we did a cost exercise of that back in 2020, and the bill stood at around about 766 million. But much of the information upon which those costs were calculated were too heavily focused on strategy, leaving our cost consultants scratching their heads because they had to attribute a number of nebulous costs and high contingencies to a number of those infrastructure items. So what we did was, over the sort of a 2.5-year period, we considerably added to our evidence base, which heavily focused on delivery. And a key feature at the commissioning stage was that we required our consultants to prepare detailed cost plans in accordance with the RICS requirements. And that fundamentally brought those costs down quite considerably. What we've since gone on to do is to complete a cash flow analysis of the infrastructure requirements, and we've overlaid the housing trajectories based on what is a likely build out across the area, along with the corresponding infrastructure and the policy requirements. And that's given us a real accurate position on when viability is going to be especially challenging for us and what the level of that gap is likely to be. Have we cracked the viability situation? No, I think I'm being honest with you in saying that. But what we are doing is we are looking to pursue an equitable approach to how developer contributions will be sought across 3 levels, from a strategic level, which everybody will pay into, right the way down to those on-plot site-specific requirements. Can I have that next slide, please? So we're now bringing forward St Cuthbert's through the local plan. That plan itself will be reaching its Reg 19 stage in March of next year, and we plan to adopt it by summer of 2026. And it will provide the framework for that at the full 30-year build out. But because of the number of the land ownerships and the fact that we've got no single land promoter, we've deliberately had to over-engineer a lot of the plan itself and a lot of the technical evidence that sits behind it, so in a way that it can respond to handling multiple applications. We've also want to avoid the situation where we get planning applications that straddles sort of various neighbourhoods. Also, we want to be in a position where the plan doesn't just do enough to get the plan over the examination line and then leaves it hanging for our DM colleagues to have sort of like those long and protracted negotiations on the 106. On the right-hand side of the screen there, what that shows is a sort of how we've tried to simplify St Cuthbert's down by breaking it into 7 neighbourhoods, and each of those will have their own bespoke allocation policies. And that will cover things very much that are drawn from the design code. It will talk about the required land uses, the phasing requirements, and again, a lot of those design-based requirements so that we can deliver fully distinctive local communities. But as I touched on earlier, that doesn't preclude applications, the way the policies are phrased, that doesn't preclude applications from coming forward that will effectively straddle those neighbourhood lines that we've identified. We'll also recognise the fact that we can't predict for everything over the next 30 years. So we've had to put some markers down in the plan and make some sort of judgments as to some of the scale of that development. We've had to look at potentially safeguarding some plots of land for certain specific items, in full knowledge that obviously through the update and the review of the evidence base, we'll look to take those forward in future reviews of the plan. Also, just as an aside, sort of thinking about that direction that successive governments have been taking with regards to plan making and the timescales around bringing plans forward, and what those implications might be for bringing large settlements forward. I think it is fair to say that if we're talking about planning for large settlements, let's make no bones about it, these are resource hungry in time, staff, and also finances. Could we have consolidated St Cuthbert's into a single district-wide local plan? No, I don't think we could have, to be fair. Perhaps one of the slight niggling worries I have over the latest proposals in the NPPF is about removing the safeguards to the status of plans in the context of that 5-year land supply. And as we all know, most plans, particularly those that promote large-scale developments, certainly won't be delivering that step change in terms of housing completions overnight. And if we're not careful, there is a risk, certainly, that 5-year land supply decisions could lead us to a situation where they redirect a limited number of outlets away from those areas of planned growth. Or we could see situations where the garden villages simply come forward in a piecemeal fashion. Can I have that next slide, please? So in terms of viability, how are we looking at it? Well, the other side of the coin, the other approach that we're taking is that we are working with government to establish a new publicly led delivery vehicle that could be operational by 2026. And that could serve to lever in public and private sector funding and expertise to bridge that viability and that cash flow gap by taking a lead in terms of land assembly and directly delivering some of that infrastructure when it's most needed. And perhaps the final thought from me is just in terms of looking at what the NPPF is saying with regards to the delivery of plans at the examination stage. And obviously, whilst the NPPF at Para 22 was kind of adjusted in the wake of the North Essex decision, it's looked to provide some sort of long-term flexibility for plans in terms of how they're examined. But to me, it doesn't recognise the fact that large-scale developments will invariably require significant capital funding to deliver upfront enabling infrastructure even in the short term. I think when you couple that with the new Para 22 that they've put in, it's interesting to see that they're now requiring plans to try and align with those of the utility providers. But when you're looking at large scale and long-term developments such as St Cuthbert's, how many infrastructure providers actually look ahead even beyond a 5-year period, let alone 10, 15 or even 30 years? So if the new NPPF goes through as it is, I think it will still require inspectors to take a leap of faith that the plan is actually deliverable. And for some local authorities, the reliance just simply on an inspector's judgment might just simply be too great a risk if they're looking to consider bringing forward large-scale developments through a local plan. So could I have that next slide, please? So finally from me, just some personal reflections on the journey that we've had to date. I think it is fair to say that, a normal starting point when you're starting on this is to say, what have your peers actually been doing? What can we learn from? What can we copy even? Certainly what we found very quickly is, there is no single solution. I think every large-scale development is different. It has its own challenges and it has its own opportunities. So as I say, there is no single textbook or blueprint as to how we can deliver on these. Certainly we started on the journey back in 2017 and we're only now getting to the point that we're at Reg 19. So that's 7 years that's taken us to get to this point. But as I say, we've had to learn, very quickly along that journey. Could we have saved some time? Yeah, we probably could have saved a couple of years, shaved a couple of years off of the journey, knowing what we know now. I think it's important to recognise the fact that you need to break these large-scale developments down into bite-sized chunks, from the pre-planning to the planning stages, and get the right people in the room at the right time. One thing I would say is do not take your eye off the fact that at the end of the day, this has got to be delivered as well. And if you're looking at things like new road schemes or new schools that need to be delivered, don't just simply, land them in the laps of your other colleagues and say, go ahead and deliver that, and only giving them sort of like, a couple of years to crack on with that, because in some instances, some of this will require a lot of pre-planning work in its own right. I think it's important, obviously, to bring everyone on that journey as best you can. Remember the fact that, happy communities equals happy politicians and gives you a stable platform to move forward with. I would certainly be in the situation where I would, if you're bringing in specialist consultancy support, do shop around. we found that many of, without being disrespectful, many are very good on the strategy, but when you start to ask them about how are you actually going to deliver on this particular item, how is it going to be costed up, that's when you start to sort of like to separate the wheat from the chaff. I would suggest certainly making your viability and your cost consultants one of the first appointments that you make, so you can actually inform those commissions before they go out. I would also recognise the fact that probably whether you're in the north of England, the south of England, that you will inevitably run into viability challenges. But I would say don't panic at that stage. Look to establish what your red lines are. I think it is important to be flexible in terms of what is absolutely fundamental and critical to make your large scale development work, and what are those areas that you can kind of perhaps leave behind or defer to later points in the build. Are there alternative delivery methods as well? Certainly, I'm aware that CLG is looking at the role of development corporations with regards to large scale the new settlements program. I would also say keep it simple as well as best you can. We spent a lot of time, if I'm being honest with you, perhaps overthinking, overanalyzing it, when in fact we probably we ended up coming full circle and going back to the point where we realized what we originally thought was actually the right way forward. And I think just to finish off with, it is a case of being patient. The plan, make no bones about it, doing this kind of work is a long-term exercise, but certainly I think the benefits will certainly speak volumes once the schemes do get up and running. Thank you. That's me done. And I'll hand over to Nisha now to talk about Harlow and Gilston.
Thanks, Neil. I could just say what he said, really. So that was really informative. I really enjoyed that. My name is Nisha Polaine. I'm the director for Harlow and Gilston Garden Town. And I'm going to talk about what it's like to start moving large-scale development off the policy and the paperwork into delivery, although we are right at the beginning of that in Harlow and Gilston. It's certainly a lived experience, and you will hear me repeat some of the themes that you've heard Neil already talk about, not surprisingly. Could I have the next slide, please? Thanks. So just by way of orientation, Harlow and Gilston Garden Town describes both an area of spatial growth and the way that growth will happen. It aims to provide 23,000 new homes, which are allocated in local plans, in 4 new neighbourhoods in and around the existing town of Harlow, which has a population of around 85,000 people. It covers 5 local authority areas, 3 districts and 2 county councils, and it also straddles the boundary of the 2 sub-national transport bodies, East of England and Heart of England. None of the land is in public ownership, it's all in private ownership, and it is split, I think, at last count between 14 developers or land promoters. We estimate that the growth will require about 1.3 billion of social and economic infrastructure, which will be a blend of Section 106 and public funding. So you can see just from that short description that the scale and complexity of this delivery poses significant risk in terms of actually achieving it, and risk to the partners involved in it. And we were awarded Garden Town status in 2017. So that's just a little bit of orientation. If I could have the next slide, please. So like Neil, the Garden Town started with visioning. So this breaks down a little bit more of the detail. So we have 10,000 homes across 7 villages at Gilston. They have resolution to grant, and we're just negotiating out the Section 106 on those, and I could do a presentation just on that. Then we have the rest of the new homes split in the sites that I've set out there. Latton Priory is in for planning currently, due to be determined in the next 6 months or so. East of Harlow, we're awaiting the appointment of a master planner, and Water Lane has a consortium, I think, of about 5 developers, and we're just at the beginning of doing some community consultation work with them. So complexity in terms of how growth will be delivered. So the way we want to deliver it is using the principles of garden town development. But I think what this really goes to the heart of, and Neil was talking about this earlier, was about how do you mitigate the impact of growth, and what does it mean for this existing town? So the 3 district councils have stitched their local plans together. Each of them say the same thing about this growth, which is amazing. But already Harlow was at capacity, and it was particularly at capacity in terms of transport. So underpinning this is a really ambitious plan around transforming transport to a sustainable transport network and achieving significant modal shift. And that's taking place in an environment where public transport is quite complex in terms of our approach to it. We estimate that this initiative could create 20,000 jobs a year. What the impact of that is once trajectories start to come online, that's 1,000 jobs a year. The corollary of not doing that is you get a system where you get dormitory development, people in cars, and they're travelling outward. So you can't divorce the homes and jobs. You shouldn't divorce the homes and jobs. But I think our system is a little bit siloed, and it does do that. So one of the things we're trying to do is grow all the legs that are needed at the same time. It's also about creating social endowment for the future, and stewardship, and trying to deliver strong stewardship framework is woven into the heart of it as well. Next slide, please. So I saw one of the questions in the chat to Neil was about why are you doing it here? So this is why we are doing the garden town where we are. So let me start with that middle diagram. Harlow is the red blob in the middle of that map. The paler pink blob is the innovation corridor. This stretches from London up the M11, past the international airport at Stansted, through to Cambridge and Peterborough. This has a GVA that is 20% higher than the UK average, and the ability to grow significantly as a powerhouse for the UK over the next 20 years. So the location here is just phenomenal. Our outside London, near an international airport, halfway between London and Cambridge. It's just incredible. If you look on the left-hand side, you can see some diagrammatic illustrations of some of the issues we have in the existing town around socio-economic deprivation, and they're quite significant. Harlow is the second most deprived town in Essex. It has the second lowest educational attainment, the highest rate of crime, and the highest rate of suicide. So some really sobering statistics in terms of the things that are happening in terms of the social dynamics in Harlow. On the right-hand side, you can see what we think the projected population growth and employment growth will be. I'm sorry, but they're a bit crammed, those slides. But if the trajectory is built out in the way that we think we will, over time, this place will grow faster than Cambridge, Liverpool, Leeds, Manchester, 5 times faster than Manchester. It's absolutely enormous potential. And in the space of 20 years, we could be doubling the population of the existing town. Next slide, please. So how have we started to turn this into delivery? Well, I'm starting with governance, which might look a little bit dull, but actually is really, really important in terms of being able to make agile decisions that support delivery coming forward. So governance is always an evolution, not a revolution. And in 2017, the Garden Town was established through the duty to cooperate, and it has been governed by an informal Garden Town board without powers or written agreement to roles and responsibilities. That's not a criticism of it, that's what it needed to do at the time. And the 5 authorities that have made up that partnership have achieved extraordinary things going forward on that basis. And sometimes with governance, there are very difficult questions that involve territory and the way local authorities do things that have to be asked at the right time. What this meant was that decision making was very slow. The board would make recommendations. It would then go through the governance of 5 authorities. The quickest we could get a decision through was 4 months, and the longest took about 2 years. So we did a governance review, and that set us on the path to form a joint committee, which I spent 2 years negotiating with the 5 authorities. And from that, they agreed to establish a formally constituted joint committee. So the next slide, please. That's just a diagram of what that looks like. But the important thing here is that you have 5 local authorities with equal voting rights and delegated powers that are formally constitutionally delegated, who can now start to take decisions on behalf of the growth across the whole area. And you can see I've listed out what they have delegations over. That doesn't include DM powers at this stage, but I think they are on a journey probably to some type of delivery vehicle in the future. But it allows them to have a unified single voice in terms of making decisions, but also importantly, there is transparency to the public and the wider community about how decisions are made. So next slide, please. The second thing here is around having a good plan. I'm a firm believer you need a good plan. When I started with the Garden Town, the first thing I asked for was the master programme, and then I found we didn't have one. So that's something that I've put in place. And really, this is about always knowing what your big picture is, always knowing where it is you are going in order that you are planning and prioritising the right interventions, hopefully at the right time, and letting that be your lodestar and letting that guide you. It's important, as well as plan making, and Neil talked a lot about that you're also thinking about place making and you're thinking about brand making, because you're developing a proposition here that's about getting people to buy in it, not just to live in it, but investors to invest in it. And the more that your land value increases, the more your place proposition increases, the more viable your project is to deliver. Neil talked about consultants. I'd agree with that point completely. You will need different skills at different times, and they can change quite quickly. And for that reason, I've operated a model which is very commissioned based, bringing in expertise as it's needed. But the expertise will only be as good as the clienting. So you need to have a team of core, strong, intelligent clients to be able to work with the consultants to get the right outcome at the right time. All of that takes funding, and it takes funding over a long time. And you can put a lot of money in up front, and your return can be much further out in terms of seeing homes on the ground. So this Garden Town's been going since 2017. It's built 5,000 homes so far within the existing fabric of Harlow, but yet to deliver on the big strategic sites. That has required staffing and resourcing, and investing in that is really important from a revenue perspective. And I'm going to talk about infrastructure funding in a minute. It's also really important to remember that you can talk about spreadsheets and you can talk about units and allocations, but this is about people and this is about places, and all of that around you, and your politicians will have that at their heart. And it's really important to remember the kind of the humanity of what you're dealing with. Next slide, please. So this is huge when you work on a project where you don't own any of the land. So you have to have a very strong team that understands negotiating with developers and working through planning applications. As I said, we're working through the 10,000 homes at Gilston at the moment. And it's complex. All 5 partners need to agree the position before you go to the developer with the position. At least 3 of the partners will be signatory to the 106, and sometimes it will be 5. So there's a lot of complexity behind the scenes before you even get to the developer discussion. The speed of decision making can be an issue. Risk of challenge obviously rises as well. Capacity, big applications need big resourcing for a period of time. It is a bubble, but they do need support as they go through. And experience of big applications is also rare. So you're in a very limited market of people who have worked on things of this type of scale. Neil talked about viability. That is a massive problem. When Gilston started 5 years ago, the world looked very different to the world it is in now, for the reasons he outlined very well. One of the things I feel really strongly about is the extent to which spreadsheets and debt management are driving our placemaking and our delivery. And I think that's a balance that's a bit out of kilter sometimes. The issue around upfront infrastructure is also tied in intrinsically to the deal that you make with your communities and what you are delivering and what you say you're going to deliver when for the people who already live there. So finding innovative ways that roads do go in advance, that healthcare is managed, that you can give assurances around the things that really matter to the people that live there and the people that will come. Politics change. These developments that I'm working on will be going for about 30 years. You'll go through a lot of political cycles nationally and locally at that, and the approach to them will change with it. And you have to be prepared to work with changes in political attitude around that. And for the community, growth can be very, very painful. And even though in 30 years it might seem like a benefit, in the short term, it can be hard to explain that to people. And that brings me to my next slide, please. Arguably, this should be the first slide, because people must be at the heart of it, and you must take them with you all the time. Part of the issues we face around delivering large-scale growth are around the fact that people, by and large, have their face set against it, even though they do want the things it brings. They want homes for their children, they want jobs, they want to be able to move around easily. But it's still a difficult sell in terms of large-scale growth, and particularly the pain that you go through as you are delivering it. So really work out what matters to people, develop good mechanisms to talk to them and engage them where you can. Think about how you're engaging them. The people who want to engage with you will not necessarily be the people you need to influence. Think about the fact that this is generational growth. Think about how you're interacting with schools and younger people as well. Maintaining interest over a long time can be really hard, and consultation fatigue is a very real thing. In Harlow and Gilston Garden Town, we have what's called a quality of life project, where we've benchmarked how people are feeling and what they would like now, so we can keep going back in measuring it and also derive data to help us shape things going forward. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide. So these are the sorts of things that I have learnt so far. So on that picture, that is pretty much the team that delivers the Garden Town. So you'll see that it's the resourcing that we are putting in to deliver scale of this nature. It's lean, and there are means that you have to prioritize really, really carefully. Governance is really important. Having good, strong decision making and good understanding of what doing with your politicians is really important. Creating places is more about spreadsheets. Try not to be siloed. Try to develop the whole thing at the same time, so you've got sustainable, self-sustaining growth. It is about people. It is about places. Partnership work means you have to take time to develop your partnership quite apart from anything else. Talk about how you'll deal with difficult things before you get there and you're in crisis management. Treasure people. You're only as good as the staff that you've got, and there are not many people who have experience of delivering growth on this scale. It needs to be resourced, and not all returns can be quantified. Try and think that you have your residents sitting with you every time you make a decision. It will help you think about what that decision means in terms of the impact on the community. And at the end of the day, the quality of your relationships, both with the organisations you're working with the people that you're working with, and with your community, are everything. You have to work hard at them, so treat them well. Thanks, that's everything from me, and I will hand over to Jeremy.
Thank you very much, Nisha. Yeah, I mean, I just echo that about people, and but I'm going to be speaking a little bit more about the delivery. It's fascinating hearing Neil and Nisha's sort of journey up to this date on their schemes, because in terms of Chelmsford Garden Community, we are in kind of implementation mode. So first of all, sorry, Jeremy Potter, I'm the Spatial Planning Manager at Chelmsford City Council. And one thing I was also reflecting on listening, I've been working on this project since 2005. It's nearly 20 years. It's a large portion of my career, and also I come from Chelmsford and went to school very close to where this development is. So I think just picking up on those points in terms of continuity is just so crucial to get something so complicated, boil it down into something that you can actually deliver, is a really crucial thing. So Yeah, we are, and again, we're a small team. We've got 4 officers dealing with Chelmsford Garden Community, and I'll speak a little bit more about the multiple kind of issues and challenges in terms of delivery. But what I'm really glad about is that this presentation's working, because I was a little bit worried right at the beginning, because this is quite a visual consult presentation. So if we can just go on to the next slide, please. I'm just going to explain. Chelmsford, there we are. We're right in the middle of Essex, just to the east of Harlow. We're on a slightly different corridor. We're on that A12 corridor going out towards Colchester and Ipswich and Suffolk, the ports, Felixstowe and Harwich, and slightly different context. But we are close to London. We are 35-minute train journey into London. So we have that kind of eternal issue about wanting to ensure that we're a place in our own right. And we've a city, we have city status given to us in 2012, but also reflecting and acknowledging the fact that London is close and other big draws and gravity in terms of where people want to go to and where people want to work and so forth. We can't just ignore that. So that's where we are. And the green belt as well, although this isn't showing the green belt on there, if you could just imagine the green belt wrapping around London just to the sort of south and to the west of Chelmsford all the way. So we're just kind of on the edge of the green belt, and that's one of the reasons why we've located the garden community where it is. So moving on to the next slide. So that's kind of like the next drawing in terms of that's Chelmsford, and we're to the northeast. The garden community is to the northeast of Chelmsford, and primarily that is because the infrastructure, the existing infrastructure, is to the east and the north. You can see the A12 going round. There's 2 park and rides that are already there to the east and the north of the city. There's also, and I'll be talking about that in a bit more, there's lots of infrastructure plans for this area. So when we were looking at locations, there's this kind of interdependency between promoting strategic infrastructure and where the new development's going to go. And I think we were really keen to ensure that we use development to bring forward the strategic infrastructure that was being proposed by other agencies, and using development to lever that opportunity to bring forward new really important new, especially transport infrastructure, to make these places deliverable, and also make these places focus primarily on public transport rather than on private transport. So if we could just go on to the next slide to sort of drill in. So what we can see there is that we have a quite a large area. I can't remember how many. I think it's about 400 or 500 hectares in that region. So I mean, we've got a large area there which is already being developed. So Channels and the Bewley indicated there on that plan are already being developed, and they've already got consent for nearly 4,500 homes. And this whole area, in which I should have said right at the beginning, is about 10,500 homes. But I think, picking up on Naisha's point, it's really important to focus on everything else apart from the homes. In the southeast, in some ways, the homes kind of deal with themselves, because there's always people and developers wanting to develop. It's everything else that makes a place really more challenging. The infrastructure, the employment, the non-residential uses, the things that make places nice places to live for people rather than just a housing estate. So the other thing you'll note here is that, similar to what was discussed in relation to multiple land ownership, this is primarily a developer-led scheme. This is private land, we own some land, the council owns some land. Fortuitously, that land was where the railway station is being built. So we were able to intervene in that process to make sure that the land was available for the new railway station. But it is a challenge to corral different landowners and different promoters who will come together to promote a big vision, but when it comes down to delivery, they will be responsible to their own delivery mechanisms, their own business planning, their own shareholders. So making sure that we bring all of that together to make sure that the council deliver its actual vision for the place was really important. And that's been undertaken by ensuring that there's a legal agreement that covers the whole development. And ensures that those site-wide principles are embedded at the earliest possible stage to ensure that then there is integration between these zones and they're not all off doing their own thing. But I'm not going to focus too much about policy and allocations and master planning, apart from the next slide. If we could just go on to the next slide, that just gives you a little bit of an indication of what that kind of starting to look like, and effectively everything that's a little bit sort of duller in colour is being built, and everything that's a little bit more sort of stands out in colour is yet to be built. But there are a lot of challenges on this land. And reflecting on it, it's really worked hard, this land, over many hundreds of years. I mean, first of all, it was a deer park for Henry V's palace, which is Beaulieu, which is one of the reasons why one of the neighbourhood areas is called Beaulieu. Then it's been an airfield. Then it's been mineral workings. Then I think a bit of waste went in there. Then it was a golf course for a while, or parts of it for a golf course for a while. And it's really worked hard, the land. And now it's delivering us what we think is somewhere where people really want to live and bring up their kids and enjoy their lives. And we're hoping and we're seeing the fruit of a lot of hard work that's gone in from a real partnership. If we could just go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. Just to give you a bit of metrics, I know we all need to have a bit of context here. It is over 10,000 homes. We've got over 100,000 square metres of employment. We've got a new railway station being built as we speak, a new bypass that is partly built and is continuing to be built starting in the new year. We have lots and lots of green space, and we've got 5 villages within that whole development to create character and to ensure that we've got a bit of distinctiveness. There's up to 6 schools. 3 schools have been built, and I'll show you a bit of those in a moment. And we have these proposals for the mobility hubs within the development. But I think the new and enhanced bus services are the thing that really drives us. We wanted to make sure that all our development is within, it would be within 400 metres of a bus stop. But it's not just a bus that kind of goes round the houses and sort of, spends hours getting anywhere. We've got an express bus service that is operational at the moment that goes right into the city centre, and now will continue once the new railway station is open to connect into the railway stations. And we're really seeing an uptick in people because we monitor the modal shift. And if we go on to the next slide, we can just have a look at some of the targets. So 60% of trips on non-car and active modal on active modes of travel, something that you hear about on all garden communities, but that is a real stretch. That is a really difficult thing to achieve, especially when you are building development that tends to be, by its very nature, a bit detached from existing services and facilities. To get that in early and to get the pioneers that live there early to be using non-car mode is a real challenge. And we are we are being, I think we're pretty successful in our first phases. I think we're now approaching 40%. We monitor the modal share after through part of the travel planning conditions. So yeah, getting that in, getting the half of the development being green. 15-minute villages. We started with this term. It's become a bit toxic this term, unfortunately, and it's more now about walkable neighbourhoods. But the premise of being able to get all your kind of day-to-day needs very close to you, is a really good starting point. And having those village centres, we call it the power of 10. Having 10 different uses in those village centres, at least 10 different uses, is really important to make sure that they're vibrant throughout the day, and they're not just shops that shut at a certain time. It's a vibrant village centre or town centre within each one of these villages that actually provides services and facilities and a bit of vibrancy that people want to see. And also the one job per dwelling target is, again, a really important to ensure that we're just not we're building a new place, a new neighborhood, a new environment for people to live in, rather than just lots and lots of boxes in a field. So if we could just move on to the next, that just gives you a bit of an indication of that kind of bigger picture in terms of participatory governance, which I'll talk about a little bit more, active travel, inclusivity, being able to get places that you need, the things that you need really easily, and also that green and blue infrastructure. We go on to the next slide, please. We'll talk about the partnership. Now, one of the things that I think helps is that it's quite simple in Chelmsford. What you'll see is that Chelmsford's in the middle of quite a large area that the City Council, its administrative area. So we're not really near any boundaries with any other authorities, and we're in a two-tier system in Chelmsford, in the sense that the county council deal with the highways and the education and all those sorts of things. So working really closely with Essex County Council has been key over the last 20 years or so. And again, we do have different developers, but we've got three main developers, which again does help in the sense that, or promoters, because it does help in terms of making sure that we are able to corral and ensure that partnership approach is really implemented on the ground. And Homes England has been a great process in undertaking that throughout this. Although we were quite late on that kind of journey to get the full sort of garden community status. I think that was in 2019. So moving on to the next slide. Again, we've got a really simple governance process. We've got a delivery board that has parties that you saw, and it's really senior parties. We're talking our chief executive is the chair, our leader is on that, and then really senior people from each one of those parties is on the delivery board. We have then a delivery group that gets on with the day-to-day. We have a community liaison group that is checking in with the community all the time. And then we have other subgroups, primarily infrastructure and highways. But we found that overcomplicating things can lead into lots of meetings, lots of groups, lots of possibly uncoordinated efforts. And boiling it down into the really important aspects has been really important us to actually deliver. If we go on to the next slide, please. So stewardship is really key. And again, if I was reflecting on this, I would have wanted to do this a lot sooner in the process. But as you heard, we started this journey probably 20 years ago. And the environment was very different then. one of I think the things that I'm really proud of is the fact that there were 4 parish councils in that area that I just showed you, and through a governance review, a community governance review, we have effectively partitioned off those 4 parish councils and created a new parish council. They call themselves a community council because they prefer that term. But we've got effectively a new parish council that deals with the whole of our area, which is absolutely invaluable to make sure that the people that are starting to live there really have a say in what's happening in that area. And the other thing I really like about it is that, my experience about parish councils, a lot of them have been, well, most of them have been kind of around for 125, 130 years. They've kind of got a certain way of working. When you set a brand new one up and they're new people that are moving in there, they are so keen to get things moving, to get things improved, to be really part of the development. They're really proud of their development, and therefore using that has been really invaluable again for us to ensure that people feel that they have ownership and they have got a stake in the place. And in terms of who's actually doing it, we've got the Land Trust is doing a lot of the work, and that's a charity that are doing a lot of the work in the Beaulieu development. We have also a community interest company, and we've got a trust as well that runs the community centre. So people are at the heart of the residents are at the heart of actually the governance of the place. It isn't the city council, it isn't the county council telling them what should happen. It's coming up from the bottom, from the residents that live there. And what we will be doing is we will be extending that. So what the rest of the development that is in place at the moment to be developed, we're setting out what we want to do is just have one single not-for-profit stewardship entity that relies on endowment, it relies on assets, and also service charges. Service charges is, I'm afraid, something that is very difficult to get away from, but those service charges are capped, and those service charges, people have visibility on what's happening, because that's one of the things that, again, we have a lot of feedback from our residents on there to ensure that they feel like they're not paying twice. They're not paying for their service charge and then they're paying their council tax. It's just making sure that people understand that. And I suppose the other thing to just reference is that getting that into the legal agreement in the first place makes sure that you don't get that kind of fragmented stewardship. Unfortunately, we slightly fragmented, but we just need the site-wide approach, because otherwise it's very difficult to get into when you get all of these mancos, CICs being set up in an uncoordinated way that doesn't lead to really effective stewardship. So just moving on, I have got some photographs you'll be pleased to see. Things happening, which I like seeing. I like seeing stuff actually happening on the ground, and that's our new train station being built at the moment. Will be open next year. First train station to be built on that line for over 100 years. Being funded through Housing Infrastructure Fund. And again, we've been really, I suppose I'd say lucky. I think, yeah, we have been lucky, but it has been brought about by the vision of the council to actually get on and embrace growth, and that has led to money coming to us. So yeah, I'm very, very looking forward to getting on one of those trains next year. And then moving on to the next slide. Unfortunately, we do have a bypass, and I say unfortunately because I'd rather not build lots of roads, rather not pump the money into the roads. But unfortunately, people still, a significant amount of people will still be using their car, and also we need to think about strategic traffic as well. So again, part of the HIF has paid or is about to pay for the first section of the Chelmsford Northeast bypass, and that's some advanced works that are on the ground. They'll be building the main line of the. Believe it or not, that bridge is a bridge that is needed for the garden community, and we got that in early to connect some parcels each side of the main line, which is actually going sort of from the bottom to the top of the photo. So it's just making sure you can get that in early as well. And then if we could go on to the next slide. Schools have been really important. I think they bring a community together, and bringing in a school early, the earliest you can, we've found that being really, really important. So that is Essex's first all through school. So that's a primary school. Well, there's a nursery, a primary school, and the secondary school all on one site. And one of the things that we really wanted, to the right of this is the neighbourhood centre, which you can't see. But what we didn't want, and unfortunately what we've achieved a little bit on the next primary school, which I'll show you, but what we want is actually that actually addressing public space, public realm. We want the school to be part of the community centre and not having a great big fence around it, because that's what schools tend to feel like sometimes. So that whole square there, where the children, when at the end of day, that's just full of people, full of activity. Unfortunately, there's only one person in it now. I should select my photos a bit better, but it has lots of activity, and next to it is the neighbourhood centre and community centre. So people are kind of milling around there, getting their coffee, getting what they need from the neighbourhood centre, and making sure that there's that kind of social interaction of people. And the next slide, unfortunately, probably shows this not so well. This is the second primary school. We tried to do that in the second primary school, but unfortunately, primary schools do have slightly different, and there has been slightly different approaches in relation to obviously security. So we tried to get that space, not probably as successful, and I hope that tree there, I'm just looking at that tree, I hope that tree will be surviving the winter, but that's just opened in September. That's the second primary school that's opened. And again, making sure that people have access to those local facilities close to where they live is just essential. And you can see there's a cycle path in front of it, so it's not a road, there's a cycle path before the road. If we just move on to the next slide, please. So here's just some examples of what it looks like. And I suppose some people say to us it's quite low density, and it is. There are some low density parcels, but what we've actually achieved, and I hope if any of you are aware of the scheme and have been there, actually outside of those big landscape structural landscape that goes through it, the parcels can be quite tight, they can be quite dense, and we've been really lucky to get some, we've got 2 housing design awards. So we've Bewley and Channels have both won the housing design award. So we're feeling like we've actually been recognised for some of the placemaking that we're trying to achieve. And when I speak to people that live there, and again, speaking to the actual residents is really important. Again, being fixated on spreadsheets and plans and allocations, actually speaking to people, what they like about it is they just feel like it has got a place. They feel like they can breathe there. That's what they say to me. It's somewhere they feel safe. They breathe. They can let their children cycle around and have that sense of community. And I think that's what we're achieving. So if we can just move on to the next slide, that just shows you. The top one just shows you the first neighbourhood centre, just shows you some examples of different types of architecture. And again, we haven't been to the architecture side of things. We haven't necessarily been too precious about. What we're really keen about is to make sure that we get the blocks and the spaces and the routes right. And there's different types of architectural styles. What you will see throughout the development is that there's one binding factor, and that's the gable. The gable, that pitch gable, is reflected throughout the development. There's lots of different styles of form, but the gable is the thing that brings it all together into what we hope is that kind of really simple design code. that we've implemented across Bewley. And then if we go to the next slide, channels is slightly different. So that's the second neighbourhood, and you can see in that top left hand side there is a zone there that's really feels, it's quite low density and it feels like a very villagey, but there are other more modern interpretations within the channels development as well. And it goes to people, I suppose it goes to the fact that people just like different styles of development. We shouldn't be necessarily sort of placing our taste. Some people like the more traditional style, some people like the modern style, and providing something that enables them to have best of both worlds, I think we've tried to achieve. If we move on to the next slide, and the one thing that we're really, really proud of is that last week we won the Great Neighbourhood of the Year award from the Urbanism Awards, and I suppose this one really is like really something that we feel, we've got Helsinki there, we've got Shrewsbury, Aberdeen, and the Strand, and we won the Great Neighbourhood. And yeah, again, I think it's the judges said that it just feels like somewhere people really like living, and I think if we can achieve that, that feels like what we're all set out to do from the beginning, from the local plan allocation all the way through to delivery. If we can achieve that and finish our days and know that people really like living there, I think that's job done. I think that's probably it in terms of my slides. Yes. So I'll hand you back over to Fionn, because I think there's probably quite a few questions that are on the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. And I think it's the proof of the pudding that you've just set out there, that this developments of this scale, complexity and quality can happen. It's a long journey, and I think yourself and Naoise and Neil have really set out that journey in different contexts today very ably. For me, it is a story, it's a narrative. It's a hard job to do, but it's the passion, drive and persistence of people like Naoise, Neil and Jeremy that actually make these places happen. It's not an easy journey. What we've been reflecting on today is some of the innovation, people at the heart of these projects, commitment to quality, and the challenges around delivery of local politics, local communities, etc. We've had a huge number of questions on the chat, and we're going to try and work through most of them. We have grouped some just to try and cover off as many as we possibly can. So Neil and Naoise and myself will put ourselves on screen, and we'll have a Q&A session for the next 15 or so minutes. So thank you to all three speakers. Just before I start with the questions, so I'm going to start with I just really like a quick fire answer to this question. I'm going to ask all three, and I'll start with Neil. Same question is, can our current planning system really deal with the planning of projects at garden communities at the scale of 10,000 plus homes? Neil, you first. And you're on mute, I think. No, can't you? Can I go to Naoise just while we sort out the sound?
Yeah, sure. Okay, I'm going to go probably. So I think the thing is like, you don't, wake up one morning and there's an application for 10,000 homes on your desk. That's not the way it works. So it's an iterative process that happens over time. There are encouraging signs in terms of adding capacity into the planning system, although you don't hear so much about the number of planners who are leaving either through retirement or other reasons. So I think that is a concern, but let's be optimistic and say that more planners will come through the system. Definitely got at least one coming through. My son's just graduated as a planner. And I think then there is the ideal opportunity to look at new innovative ways of delivering planning decisions. And I think it's time that we really thought about that, sharing services or having specialised teams for applications over a certain level that allows capacity to be built within areas that have these applications, because they don't happen that often. Even if there's a huge programme, they still won't happen that often.
Thanks, Naoise. Neil, is your volume sorted? Oh, sorry, we still can't hear you. No problem. I'll just, Jeremy, any reflections from your perspective as to whether the current planning system can really deal with developments of this scale effectively?
I'm going to say hopefully. Yes, I think there are some significant challenges, because these are what we're talking about now are things that are dealt with outside of the norm in terms of the planning system, and it's the length of time really that these things take. And unfortunately, our planning system seems to always change. And I think my view is that you just keep going. And there's a lot of noise around certain things. If you've got a really strong, clear vision and you've got support and political support, just keep going, and it will hopefully sort things out through that kind of persistence. I think it's just being persistent. I think the other thing is that there is a bit of luck involved as well, I've got to say, and stars aligning. Sometimes, I've gone through that presentation and there were all sorts of challenges on the way. That wasn't an easy journey in any shape or form. And just keep going and be persistent, I think, is my view on it.
Thank you. Yeah, persistence counts for a lot. We're just waiting for Neil to rejoin the meeting and sort out his volume issue. So I'm going to skip over a couple of the other questions and come back to those. One of the areas I know that both of you have been very persistent in pushing forward is around stewardship, with different approaches to reflect both your context. So Nisha, I was wondering if you could just give us a very brief overview of the approach to stewardship that it is proposed to take at Harlow Gilston.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, important to remember the context of Harlow Gilston, which is 23,000 homes, but they're in different settlements, they're in different spaces. So you would have to ask yourself the question whether it was appropriate to have one stewardship model that covered such a massive geographic area, and would that be the best for what stewardship aims to try and deliver in terms of community engagement and local accountability. So there's some real fundamental questions about that. So Gilston will have its own stewardship body that's already baked into the heads of terms for the section 106, and is quite advanced. We've also developed a stewardship charter as a garden town that has been adopted or endorsed by all of the district planning authorities. This is the way that the garden town works. So as the other applications come in, they will have to conform to the charter, and that has material planning consideration. Alongside that, we're also doing some research into what would an overarching body look like, what could it do, and we've proposed a number of models to members. So it might do stuff like economic development, or it might be a creative arts stewardship, or it might have something to do with the sustainable transport work. So we're scoping that at the moment. So that's kind of where we are in a very tight nutshell.
Thank you. And Jeremy, stewardship, I know you referred to it in your presentation, but stewardship has been really important at Chelmsford, particularly given the context that you have there.
Absolutely. And it's not easy, I've got to say, because it is inherent on the local authorities or the public bodies to really push this. I think possibly all of the developments that we've heard about today are primarily developer-led, not kind of public sector-led. And we need to intervene and to ensure that those really robust stewardship mechanisms are in place at the earliest possible stage, and embed them in the development of these garden communities, because it's really difficult to do it retrospectively. And that's what we've found a little bit in terms of, some of our development came out with, with predominantly two different styles of community stewardship, and to try and retrofit that has proved quite tricky. So what we're trying to do, what we are going to achieve is, that single entity for the remainder of the garden community. And it's, working out what the right legal body is. Is it a community benefit society? Is it a community interest company? It's making sure that you choose the right one for the particular aspects that you're looking at. And as Naisha says, we're looking on our assets list. We're looking at the mobility hubs, the off plot car parking, housing, actual community housing being, as well as retail and other sort of non-residential uses being all part of the stewardship model. It's not just about cutting grass. I suppose that's the thing I'd like to leave as a message. It's not about cutting grass. Cutting grass is just a given, and hopefully we don't cut a lot of the grass as well. We leave a lot of it uncut. But that's the kind of, sometimes it's just getting people out of that mindset. It's much more than that.
Yeah, I know the structures that you've set up at Chelmsford, are really speak to everything that you want to achieve there, and particularly with local members and commitments to the local community. So it's a great example to follow. We're unfortunately, Neil's just having Neil, we can see you on the screen. Are you back? Hooray!
I am indeed. Sorry.
Great, just in time for some land value capture questions. We've just been talking about stewardship. There's been a lot of questions about infrastructure of different sorts. Land value capture, viability, Section 106 provision, and particularly around different parts of the country where land values are stretched. So, Neil, without wishing to put you on the spot, I was wondering if you could give some reflections in respect to St Cuthbert's, how viability and land value capture is being addressed there at the policy stage.
Yeah, it's a good question, actually. I mean, to be fair, and apologies, this is what comes of having your IT people telling you to reboot your computer and install new software. Always happens. Teams always die. It's the first one to go. So my apologies. So yeah, how have we approached it? Well, I think as I touched on in my presentation, I don't think I really have all of the answers. I think what we've had to do is I think first and foremost we're probably, or we will be, in part taking a position that we want a sort of a kind of a fair and equitable approach to land value capture, so that every developer pays their fair proportion. I think with that, what we've had to do is to manage landowners' expectations within that, in terms of the valuation of their land. What we've had to do is to work with, and I think this picks up some of the questions that have come through the chat, we've had to work with landowners to pretty much say, look, you have to rely on your neighbours. You cannot just rely on your individual site. If you've got the residential on your land, don't think you're going to get residential value, because you are reliant on your neighbours to deliver the SUDs, the open space, or whatever mitigations that may or may not be required, or some of the other wider infrastructure. So what we've had to do is to get a number of those landowners in a place that they are working together, they're talking to one another. So we've had to play a bit of that kind of honest broker type role as well, in terms of fixing up some of the neighbouring land, some of the neighbouring farmers. With regards to the viability position itself, as I say, what we've had to do is to get to that position where we've got an understanding of when it really does bite, when viability can and will bite within that build program, within the build program. I think it is fair to say we're kind of at the stage where we're now looking at where do we need to flex within viability, particularly to get some of those early schemes over the line that we're wanting to do. Ultimately, I want to walk into an examination with several permissions under my belt, just to demonstrate that the scheme is certainly deliverable. So it's, yes, we're going to have to take that flexible route, but obviously at the back of it is the role of that delivery vehicle in terms of where that can and will come in, to bridge that gap. So that's again something that we're working through from our end.
Thanks, Neil. Thanks. And Jeremy, just turning to you, clearly at delivery stage, land value capture Section 106 provision, have you been able to ensure that the infrastructure that people have expected to be delivered in the back of Chelmsford Garden Community has been delivered, or have there been viability challenges with that?
yeah, I mean, they're viability challenges. I'm not sure there's any large strategic site anywhere in the country where there aren't viability challenges, and we've had our fair share, I've got to say. I suppose just reflecting back on some of Neil's comments, getting the local plan viability right at the first, at the earliest stage to temper landowners' expectations is important, and having a master plan that is undertaken site wide so everyone understands where the displacement of uses are going and where the school's going, and then there's an internal equalisation between parties to ensure that there isn't someone coming at the end riding getting a free shot at all the infrastructure coming in at the end. So it's making sure of those matters happen, and also public funding, having public funding coming in for some of the strategic infrastructure schemes has been really important. Without it, we wouldn't been able to build some of that strategic infrastructure that unlocks the site. So that has been exceptionally important. But yeah, I mean, the first phase is to bring forward the schools early, and to bring forward some of the really key infrastructure. We had to have a discussion about affordable housing, and overall we're achieving 30% on the scheme that we're building at the moment. Our policy is 35%. So we had to, at the very earliest stage, the first outlines, we had to have a serious discussion about those aspects. But as we move forwards, the policy compliance on affordable housing will make up that difference. But it's just such a big, long scheme. So yeah, you have to make some trade-offs at the beginning to make sure that you get the right infrastructure in early. That's just the reality of development.
Yeah, and but keeping your eye on the bigger prize, if you like, the end game.
I think could I just say one thing on that, Fiona? I think this is where, actually, to being controversial, the local authority, the public sector suffer in terms of skills and capacity. Viability is incredibly technical, and you need people who've got a black belt in maths and spreadsheets to be able to play the game well, and it is an area where there needs to be a lot more support. What I usually find is if you get someone in the public sector who's good at that stuff, they will pretty much be poached by the private sector very fast. And that puts the local authorities at a disadvantage. For the developer side, the pot is only so finite. So you have to, they haven't got a magic money tree, and we do pile in and ask them for absolutely everything and then get really cheesed off with them when they go, but we still have to make a margin. So there is kind of pros and cons around the viability argument, just to add my view on it.
That's really helpful, and particularly with your experience at the sharp end of negotiations at the moment. We're coming rapidly to the end of our session. We are running out of time, and we haven't clearly addressed all of the questions that have been posed. So just to reassure people that we will pull together some responses with the speakers to some of the key questions that you've posed, and we'll share those. And I know that the end of session poll has been posted, so please do answer the poll questions posed there. But I would just like to come back to you, Naisha, and I think it probably is the final question, and it is around, there's been a lot of questions around sustainability and net zero, and I know at Harlow, Gilston, Garden Town, you've got a very high aspiration and modal share target for sustainable travel. I would be interested in some reflections from you, given the stage you're at how is it intended to achieve that? What are the building blocks that will need to be put in place?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, because you have to have it all queued up through the whole system, don't you? So you can't have just one local authority or a partnership of local authorities insisting on a standard that then won't stand the test of scrutiny further up the system. So this is an area, I think, of national leadership, actually. You can get developers, and you can get places that can negotiate higher than standards because they want to, because they are committed to it. But on the whole, you've got to have a strong national framework that's supporting you at a local level. I think that's my sort of very broad point on that. And I'd say I've seen a lot of the questions around transport, actually, and sustainability measures around a modal shift. And I'm really fond of saying this, but there has to be a fundamental rethink about how we fund public transport in this country. You can't expect standalone developments of 10,000 homes to suddenly be sustainable when they're not connecting into a sustainable network. You know, that it doesn't work like that. And so we can have all the aspirations we want, but if we don't have a system that allows reasonable fares and connectivity onward to places, we are set up to fail right from the beginning, however dedicated and committed we are to it. So I know that all of us try really, really hard on that. And I think it's really important, actually, and I'm reading the comments in the chat, this mustn't be about being anti-car. It's about rebalancing the system, and it's generational change, and it's allowing choice. So I'm really pro sustainable transport, but I don't think it's reasonable to tell people to stop using their cars when they haven't got anything that's a reasonable alternative. So that would be my observation. This is a long journey, sustainable transport.
And I guess with a lot of the garden communities, all aspects of them, it is a long journey. And it's been great hearing different reflections from the three of you today along that journey. We are now coming to the end. Just going to ask for the last few slides to be posted up, please. I would just like to say huge thanks to Jeremy, to Naisha, and to Neil for their contributions today. We have some takeaways, if you like, that personal reflections around top tips from the three speakers today. For me, they've been break the project into stages and bring in the right skills for each stage, but get that viability cost person. If you have them in-house, great. If not, get them on board as early as possible. It's about people and places. It's not about units and allocations. Number 3, economic growth and housing growth must be developed together. Number 4, partnership working means talking through how you'll work through the difficult stuff before the difficult stuff arrives. Number 5, long-term growth needs long-term resourcing and skills. And number 6, the journey doesn't stop at planning permission or implementation. You still need to invest in community building and governance. You need to leave a legacy. These are places that are going to be around for a long time. So on the slide pack, you will have some resources there that you can tune into. I would certainly recommend that you follow those up. There's some incredible learning from these projects. So just to finish off, thank you very much for attending today. Thank you to our speakers. And we look forward to the next learning session. Thank you.
Thank you.